Hello, I'm Sophie Ikenya. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. As China releases the biggest study so far of the coronavirus, how prepared is Africa? We report from Johannesburg.
Across the country, health workers are now receiving extra training on how to cope with a possible outbreak of coronavirus.
Peace in Africa will be won by Africans. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Ethiopia on the last leg of his visit. The UN says a swarm of locusts has now reached South Sudan, the first time they've been seen in the country this year. Also in the program, the unique treasures of Timbuktu under threat. We meet the team battling to save the city's ancient manuscripts. And in sports, it's the return of the Champions League with the first leg of the last 16. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Health officials in China have published the first details of more than 70,000 cases of COVID-19. It's the biggest study since the outbreak began. In China, there have been more than 72,000 confirmed cases, and the number of people who've died has passed 1,800. It's much higher in Hubei, the province where Wuhan is located and home to many African students. The mortality rate there is 2.9%, while in the rest of China it's 0.4%. The Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention says 81% of cases were mild, 14% severe, and just 5% critical. Now, the sick and elderly are most at risk. The highest fatality rate is for people aged 80 and over. Now, Africa recorded its first case of coronavirus on Friday in Egypt. The patient is reportedly a non-Egyptian and remains in isolation in hospital. Now, China is one of Africa's main trade partners with constant movement of people and goods across borders. So what precautions are in place? Pumza Fihlani reports from Johannesburg on the efforts there.
Bracing for a viral storm. In South Africa, the Chinese community is trying to reduce tensions and allay fears. Those who have recently returned from China are staying away from their businesses until they can get tested.
The Chinese shopping center owners, they're taking precautionary measures. They've got a team of staff going to the shopkeepers with forehead thermometers to measure temperature, just to say, hey guys, we want you to be healthy.
The local Chinese community are not the only ones taking precautionary measures. Across the country, health workers are now receiving extra training on how to cope with a possible outbreak of coronavirus. Scientists are still learning about the disease, but say it spreads through direct contact. These paramedics are learning how to handle a suspected carrier. This may only be a drill, but the steps taught here could help keep both them and the patient safe.
They deal with infectious diseases every day. So basically what we're doing now is just refreshing them on those procedures and just make sure that they follow standard precaution protection. I think we're ready to isolate cases. If it's a larger outbreak that does take place, we'll have to change our approach a little bit. But like I say, South Africa is a country with a lot of infectious diseases that we have been used to managing and managing it quite well.
Currently, only a handful of centres across Africa are able to test for the virus. They include Kenya, Senegal and South Africa. The continent is already vulnerable to infectious diseases.
The areas that experience the highest impact from respiratory illness normally through seasonal influenza are generally those that experience the highest impact in a pandemic. And we know that from our seasonal influenza work that Africa is a continent which experiences a very high impact from seasonal influenza, and therefore it is likely that the African continent will experience a higher impact should there be a global outbreak.
South Africa's public health care, like many across the continent, is overstretched and under-resourced. While health workers have done what they can to prepare, will it be enough to save lives? Pumza Fihlani, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Now, on the last leg of his first visit to Africa, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in Ethiopia today. He said peace in Africa will be won by Africans and that there shouldn't be the choice between democracy and security. He was optimistic that a solution will be found to the row between Egypt and Ethiopia over the Nile Dam project. But at a news conference in Addis Ababa, much of the focus was on regional security.
Our relationship provides a strong foundation for cooperation on matters of security. The Horn of Africa is a pretty dangerous neighborhood. We recommitted this afternoon to our shared fight against al-Shabaab and other Islamist terror. I also want to commend the Ethiopian people on their bravery and thank them for their sacrifices as members of UN and African Union peacekeeping missions in Somalia and elsewhere. The AU's increasing security work makes it a more effective multilateral organization. Peace in Africa will be won by Africans.
His statement comes as the Americans are planning to scale back troop presence in Africa at a time when the threat from Islamic militant groups is on the rise. Now, Mr. Pompeo said a review of the situation is currently underway.
We'll make sure that we get it right. If we've got forces in the wrong place or we have the wrong forces, we're going to fix that. We'll do it in conjunction with our friends and partners in the region. I'm confident that we can get the right force posture, the right risk for the United States, and still deliver on peace and security in a way that is important for the region, not only in the Horn of Africa, but all across the Sahel and the rest of Africa as well.
Mike Pompeo has also pledged $8 million to help fight the locust invasion in the region. It comes as the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization confirmed the fast detection of desert locusts in South Sudan. The insects have already made their way through Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Uganda, and Tanzania. Now, this swarm was sighted in Magui County in the southeast of the country and is believed to have flown in from neighboring northern Uganda. Now, Sam Kavuma is the Deputy Commander of Land Forces in Uganda. He's been spearheading government efforts to tackle the locusts through the ground spraying.
The operation aims at fighting desert locusts, which invaded Uganda 1 week ago from our neighbors, Kenya. So tracking is the biggest challenge, but otherwise, we've been tracking them, and where we get information from the local people, then we immediately respond. And the response has been good. We have been able to really kill quite a huge number of them.
Let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa. The main opposition sides in South Sudan's civil war were due to meet in the capital Juba today to agree on details for a joint transitional government, which is meant to be formed on Saturday. It is not clear whether that meeting has actually taken place. On Monday, soldiers marched alongside ex-rebels near the capital as the former warring sides formed a joint force to protect the country's politicians, which was a key demand of the 2018 peace deal. The University of Ghana has suspended 2 lecturers for a total of 10 months without salary. Professor Ransford Gaimpo and Dr. Paul Kwame Butakor were accused of sexual harassment in a BBC Africa Eye documentary, Sex for Grades, that was broadcast in October last year. Now, the disciplinary committee at the university said the pair had breached the code of conduct rules and that they will only resume work after a positive assessment. Both lecturers deny the allegations. Now, the murder trial of Lesotho's Prime Minister Lesotho's former Prime Minister is due to start next month on the 17th of March. Messiah Tabane, who made a brief appearance in court today, is accused of killing her husband's ex-wife, Lipolelo Tabane. She was shot dead in June 2017. Messiah Tabane denies any involvement in the killing. Tunisia's President Kais Saied says he'll dissolve parliament and call new elections if the country's proposed cabinet cannot win support from the legislature. Prime Minister-designate Elise Fakfak lost a confidence vote on Saturday after the moderate Islamist Ennahda party withdrew its support. Mr. Saied called it the worst political crisis since independence in 1956. Now, the ancient treasures and monuments of Timbuktu in Mali are world famous, particularly the numerous religious manuscripts collected over centuries, but they are under threat from destruction by extremist groups. Now, an American monk is leading a team of Christians and Muslims who are trying to save the treasures of Timbuktu by digitizing an entire archive. Christine Otieno reports.
It's pretty clear to me that I've been given an extraordinary opportunity to do something significant.
Father Colomba has dedicated his life to saving ancient manuscripts. He is now leading a team of Christians and Muslims in Mali who are in a race against time to preserve important Islamic texts.
Time is running out in different places. So many of the places where we've been working since 2003 were thought to be stable at one time and then were not. We've learned how quickly situations can deteriorate, even dramatically so.
Islamic extremism has led to destruction throughout Mali. Timbuktu is home to a wealth of important Sufi artifacts, but extremists who view them as heretical are destroying them. Father Colomba and his team travel with the UN to stay safe.
I can't imagine stepping away from it when there's such an obvious need. The availability of manuscripts from Timbuktu and other locations around Mali is going to transform the approach to Islam in West Africa, as well as the history of these cultures in which Islam took root when it came to this part of Africa.
Timbuktu's rich past nurtured Sufi scholarship in the region.
They developed their own scholars who commented on the Quran and other aspects of Islamic thought, their own poets who wrote songs and hymns in praise of the Prophet. So this is going to be the beginnings, probably, of an extraordinary opening of these treasures kept in the manuscripts of Timbuktu. I can't promise we're going to bring universal peace and understanding. That's completely unrealistic, because many of the people who are least interested in those things are also the ones who want to destroy these libraries. But I think especially given the enormous destabilization that we're seeing happen in so many places for so many reasons, the imperative of the work is all the greater.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come in sport, it's been a fairy tale few months for the South African men's rugby team as they pick up a top prize at the Laureus World Sports Awards. I'm Sophie Ikenya and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top story on this program: the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been in Ethiopia today on the last leg of his first visit to Africa, focusing on regional security. Well, let's get some more on that story. Joining me from Addis Ababa is Omar Mahmoud, a Somalia analyst from the International Crisis Group. Thanks for taking time to talk to us and Focus on Africa. Now, Mr. Pompeo a little earlier talked about getting it right, but I wonder whether the U.S. is still keen on its, security-first approach towards Africa and indeed Somalia.
Yeah, well, I think security is still a big part of the approach to Somalia, but there's increasingly a recognition that security alone isn't sufficient. And so I think we've seen a little bit on the political side, especially when we see politics so fractured in Somalia and this center-periphery tensions, or that between the federal government in Mogadishu and the federal member states, which is really blocking progress in a lot of areas, security included.
There are many people who have, of course, been advocating for a political solution to the crisis in Somalia. Is the U.S. pushing for consensus in any way in the country?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't get that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much the U.S. is advocating for political consensus in Somalia.
Yeah, well, I think you're increasingly seeing that, especially on the aspect of reconciliation between the center and the periphery. Security is clearly still a large part of what the U.S. is doing in Somalia, and a large part of its policy to counter and combat al-Shabaab. But, you've had the appointment of an ambassador, for example, on the diplomatic level over the past 2 years, and you had increasingly a push to really get the political side of things right in Somalia, given that you have national elections coming up towards the end of this year, given that progress hasn't been made as much on some of the other aspects as we would have liked at this point. So I do think you see an increasing push in that direction.
How much of a direct threat do the militant groups operating in Somalia pose to the U.S. or even the civilians?
Well, I don't know if they pose a direct threat to the U.S., for example, but there's this idea that al-Shabaab is a very strong militant actor, that it definitely poses a threat to the region, and that eventually it could pose a threat beyond that if not taken care of. So, I think there's been a reaction, especially based on some of the messaging al-Shabaab's put out in the past 6 months, in which the U.S. has increasingly been referred to as a target in its messaging. We've seen a couple of major attacks on U.S. military installations in the region. So I think it's this idea that if left unchecked, it could be a bigger threat.
All right. Omar Mahmoud, we have to leave it there, but thank you for taking time to talk to us and Focus on Africa. Thank you. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Time now for some sport. Mimi?
Thank you, Sophie. We begin in football, where Champions League action returns today. There are 2 matches in the first leg of the last 16. The ties look out for Atletico Madrid, who are hosting the defending champions. Liverpool, they are one of the favourites to win the trophy again this season. Also on the bill, Paris Saint-Germain, who have travelled to Germany to face Borussia Dortmund. Their Senegal international Idrissa Gana Gueye spoke to BBC's Babacar Diarra ahead of the fixture.
At this moment, we are not focused in Dortmund. We have a lot of games before Dortmund, so we take the game by game and step by step to try to win every game. And before Dortmund, maybe 1 week before, we will talk about it.
But personally, how do you feel about playing one of 16 games? It's getting more serious than the group stage. So.
It changed nothing for me because every game is important for me. I prepare every game in the same level, trying to do my best and trying to win every game.
The South African men's rugby team were one of the big winners on Monday in Berlin for the Laureus World Sports Awards. They picked up the Sports Team of the Year, beating off the likes of Liverpool Football Club, who are also in contention. Who could forget the Springboks after their incredible run during the World Cup last year, which saw them lifting the trophy, which was led by the country's first black captain, Siya Kolisi. He spoke about what it meant to get the award.
First of all, I'd like to take this moment to thank the Laureus Academy for recognizing us as a team. I want to say thank you on behalf of my teammates and obviously all of those that can't be here today, and obviously on behalf of South Africa.
And to athletics, South Africa's Wade van Niekerk is making a comeback with the Olympics just around the corner. The Olympics and world 400-meter record holder has had a knee injury, which has kept him out of action since 2017. But on Monday, the 27-year-old finished first in a 100 meters race on grass in Bloemfontein in his country, clocking in a time of 10.20 seconds. Though it was an unofficial university meet, but it will help boost his confidence, as he'll be hoping that he can defend his title in Tokyo this summer. Now, it made headlines over the weekend. The jerseys of the 12 teams that will compete in the inaugural Basketball Africa League, which tips off next month in Dakar, Senegal. The clubs will be from a dozen African countries. With just a few weeks away, here's a reminder of what Yanis Antetokounmpo, who was born in Greece to Nigerian parents, said about the creation of a league on the continent.
Creating a league in Africa, giving opportunities to, African talent and African players to, go out there and showcase their talent. It's something that, I knew it was going to happen, and, I'm pretty happy I was able to execute it with Nike and Masai and all those people.
Let's take a quick look at some other stories making headlines. South Africa's women's cricket team lost to Australia by 4 wickets in their second and final warm-up match of the Women's T20 Cricket World Cup in Adelaide on Tuesday. And the draw for the African Nations Championship, or CHAN, was held by the host Cameroon in the capital Yaoundé on Monday. The competition for local-based teams kicks off in the country in April. 16 teams will be vying to lift the trophy. Morocco are the defending champions. That's all the sports, Sophie.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you for that. Thank you. Now for a story about incredible friendship. On one hand, a Jewish woman who heads up the tiny Jewish community in Egypt. And then you have Marwa, a Palestinian woman who grew up in Gaza and took part in riots against Israeli occupation. Today, they are trying to protect Egypt's Jewish heritage. Negam Kassim went to meet them as part of Crossing Divides, a BBC season bringing people together.
اللي سايبين التراث ده، اللي سابوا هذا التراث ما عادوش موجودين.
ولازم يكون لها مستقبل. طب ايه مستقبل المعابد المهجورة ديت؟
بعد ما إنشاء دولة إسرائيل ابتدى النظرة لليهود اللي هم كانوا عايشين في مصر ابتدت تتغير. أنا كنت اليهودية الوحيدة في الفصل. درست المواد الاجتماعية، مش كانت بتتكلم عن إسرائيل ومصر بتاع، قالت الكلاب اليهود هم كلاب الجربانة بتوع المنطقة.
طبعا بالنسبة لي بيوصلني على طول على شعوري بأهلي والفلسطينيين اللي كانوا عايشين في المناطق اللي اتخذت في 48. ازاي ان هم مشيوا بيوتهم فضلت وراهم. ودي يمكن انا مش قادرة اعمل حاجة في موضوع ان انا اعمل حاجة للناس دول اللي هناك. فانا دلوقتي في مصر كمصرية انا اقدر اعمل حاجة. لما شفت المعابد اليهودية والمدافن اليهودية اللي موجودة في القاهرة، لقيت إن في حاجة موجودة ملموسة متشافة، مش بس مهجورة، ده يعني حالتها كانت صعبة، منها اللي متأثر بنيانه متهدم، منها اللي مرمي فيها الزبالة، ومنها اللي حالته كويسة. المدافن اللي مرمي فيها زبالة يمكن نص القاهرة. صعوبات أكيد، بنواجه صعوبات، بنواجه اعتراضات، بنواجه يمكن اتهامات، وده طبعا لأن لوجود الاختلافات، ومن ضمن الاختلافات في المتعصبين. تقبل الآخر وتقبل الاختلاف ده من أهم الحاجات اللي أنا عرفت أربيها جوايا. كفاية ضغط على الناس.
هتتحل مشاكلنا كلها لو تقبلنا الآخر.
اعتراف بيهود مصر هو ده اللي انا كنت بدور عليه، ان احنا كنا موجودين وعشنا هنا وساهمنا في الحياه في مصر. الدموع في عينيك النهارده، دموع فارغه، دموع فارغه. يا استاذه مجدة،
انا من النوع اللي بحب اواجه على طول واعمل مشاكل، بس يمكن انت بقى اشوفك اهدى شويه.
لا ما شفتنيش في شبابي.
فماجدة لا بتحسبها شويه كويس يعني.
ده حكم السن بقى.
يمكن، وده مفيد بالنسبه لي، خليني برضو ارجع افكر مره ومرتين.
Well, before we go, a quick look at our top story on Focus on Africa. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been in Ethiopia today on the last leg of his first visit to Africa. Now, he said peace in Africa will be won by Africans and that there shouldn't be any choice between democracy and security. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm Atsi Kenny. Thanks for your company.